Right, so hello, greetings. It's Dr. Thomas Daffern here, and it's my weekly Fasting Sunday broadcast. Events are happening fast in the world, so seems that every week there's more to report on. We're coming up to Imbolc in the Druid Christian world. It's a great celebration, the first fruits of spring, and I'll come to talk about that a bit later on. I'm going to start with a gong first, which is my way of beginning a serious talk, a dharmic talk. Okay, so when I was teaching religious studies in the schools in Britain for 10 years, I always began my classes with a little gong, just to sort of calm pupils down and get ready for some proper learning. I think it's a good practice to do, so there we are, I carry on with it. So what have I been up to this week that I want to share? Well, I want to talk first about the work of the World Intellectual Forum, which is a project dear to my heart. It's an attempt to get thinkers together from throughout the planet, every culture, religion, nation, discussing and thinking through the paradigm shift that we need to get peace on this planet. How we can heal the splits between science and religion, how we can heal the splits between different blocks of intellectuals. You know, you've got your Marxists, your fascists, your nationalists, your internationalists, your blah blah blah. They're all in different sects, and what the World Intellectual Forum is trying to do is to create a free space for thinking through how we as intellectuals can heal this split, and what we can do to find the common truths, common mind, if you want. And it's interesting and exhausting and complex work. It's something I've been fortunately working on for many years. 30 years ago I was elected coordinator of Philosophers of Peace in Moscow, in Russia. When the Cold War was, we thought, just coming to an end in 1990 with the Treaty of Paris. And 30 years on, we haven't got world peace, which is what we all hoped rather naively. We've had endless wars, endless conflicts, and we've had cyber conflicts now, and poor old Middle East has been totally decimated with Iraq, the catastrophe of Iraq, the invasion by the US and little lapdog England trotting along like a good, terrier. A catastrophe which was totally unjustified in international law. We could all watch this happening, and then we've seen the destabilization of Syria, Libya, and the continuing inability to find solutions for Syria and Israel and Palestine above all. Anyway, all that. So the World Intellectual Forum are trying to reach out to thinkers, and we have a monthly Zoom conference which took place yesterday, which was very good. It was founded, this body, in India. I was privileged to be invited. And in December 2017, we set this thing up. I represented the European, along with other colleagues. And we're now meeting, because of lockdown and coronavirus, and meeting online. Yesterday we had some very good talks. We heard from David Lorimer, who runs the Scientific and Medical Network. I've known him for many years. He himself is a very great thinker, in fact. He used to teach at Winchester College in the UK. I have a great affection for Winchester. One of my mentors as a Druid, Douglas Line, was also a graduate of Winchester. And then we had a great talk by Peter Marshall, who is an intellectual historian in Britain who's worked all over the world. He's a international thinker, but he is based actually in Wales. Very interesting man. If you don't know his books, they're really worth reading. He's written a superb history of anarchism called Demanding the Impossible, which I think is the best single text on what philosophical depths there are in anarchism, with people like Kropotkin and Godwin and Shelley and Proudhon and so on. He's also written some works of interest to Druidry in his study of the megaliths of Europe. He once took a boat trip all the way from Orkney to all the Mediterranean islands, Mallorca and so on, and stopping off and looking at megaliths en route and discovering they're all the same. He got all the way down to Malta and looked at the goddess temples. So Peter is a great savant, and he gave us an excellent talk. We heard from several Indian scholars, Indian scientists, social scientists, Aaron Sikawa, who talks about brain science and peacemaking. It's a new field of the neurobiology of peace, which is very important. He himself is a professor of neurology at a university in India. We heard from Dr. K. Siddhartha, who is a polymathic world systems thinker, a geographer actually, who is interested in the geography of peacemaking and cultural dissonance, how we can heal the splits between Indian culture and European, British, Chinese, how we can get peace between different civilizations. It's partly a geographical challenge. And he's also interested in ecology and the threat to the planet from global warming and the challenge. What can we as intellectuals do? So anyway, it was a real feast, and thank you so much to all that took part. It was recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel, same place where this is uploaded to, the IPSCIP YouTube channel, because IPSCIP is the body that's holding the World Intellectual Forum in Europe. I'm the European coordinator. We also heard from Satyen Raja, a Canadian colleague who runs the institute in Canada, a great intellectual in his own right, from Langley outside Vancouver. Canada's my other favourite place. I have many favourite places, but I love Canada still. I lived there happily for 7 years, and I have a Canadian citizenship, and I deeply honour that country and its culture, because it's a plurality within a unity. It has many different, every nation under the sun has got citizens living in Canada, and the indigenous First Nations of Canada are amazingly wise and beautiful people. And I've always loved and respected the work of Deganawida, who I think is the greatest Native American peace teacher, who has a message for the world as important as Moses or Zoroaster or Buddha or anything. And if you study his life, you realise that. So, and he was born in Canada, in the Great Lakes region. So anyway, it was a feast, and we're working together trying to get a harmony of thinking and a harmony of acting between the world's cultures. And in a paradoxical sense, lockdown is helping, because we're all stuck at home. I mean, to intellectuals, this is like a godsend. We love nothing more than to be alone in our libraries with our books. We've got the internet, we can interlink and study, it's just, this is what intellectuals do. One of my great heroes is Thomas Merton, who was a Trappist monk in the Order of Strict Observance of the Cistercians. Thomas was actually born in France here, and he was a polymathic intellectual. His father was, Owen was American Quaker, and his mother was a New Zealander, and they happened to be in France during World War I, where they fell in love, and Thomas was born down in the Pyrenees. I mean, and he, I think, is one of the greatest Catholic intellectuals of the 20th century, who wrote some amazing works. I have his diaries here, and often, read them during my prayer times. Yeah, I strongly recommend that you know, if you don't know the works of Thomas Merton, you should look at it. He was someone intellectually very into ecumenical universal spirituality. He ended up in a monastery called Gethsemane in Kentucky, and tragically died at a young age. He was electrocuted whilst attending an interfaith peace conference in Thailand, taken from us prematurely. Had he lived, I think the American intellectuals would have had more of a robust, you know, presence in the world. And he was someone who was deeply committed to peace and to non-violence, ahimsa. He was a friend of Martin Luther King and other non-violence activists in America. That's what we're trying to do as the World Intellectual Forum, is bring people like Thomas Merton together in discourse around the planet. And we heard from various Hindus and others yesterday at the conference. Okay, so moving on, just want to wish everybody a happy Imbolc, because this is actually a time of the first glimmers of spring. We can all tell in the Northern Hemisphere the lights are getting stronger. Each night, you know, the light lasts a bit longer. And it's a beautiful feeling, that slight glimmer of spring in the air, that slight hint of warmth. The first birdies beginning to make their, you know, courting noises and so on. It's a beautiful time actually in Bolc, and it's a time dedicated to the first glimmers of you know, the light at the end of the tunnel. And we've had a hell of a winter, us planet, us world. You know, we've had a most crazy winter. We've had pandemic, we've had Trumpism, we've had attacks on the Capitol, we've had Brexit rampant. We've had a sort of demonic attack on the planet, is one language to describe it. And, you know, we've had this extreme polarization between this or that. And as a philosopher, that's a challenge to my Hegelian ability to synthesize opposites. It can be done, it has to be done, as I explained in my sharings about Hegel in my last talk. That's the duty of philosophy, is to somehow heal this and keep the thing in balance. You know, the world is here spinning around, that's what Imbolc means, we're turning around again. If the world couldn't hold its poise and its balance as it spins, and if it suddenly veered off one way or the other, we'd be absolutely doomed. In fact, the world has this amazing procession whereby every 23,000 years it slightly does a great arc and then comes back round. You know, the mathematics of that are stupendous. Why it happens? I mean, Newton, who first mapped mathematically the rates of change and transformation of the solar system and the planets, and mapped it using his new discovery of calculus, or as he called it, fluxions, because he knew that the mathematics to describe the heavenly bodies is to do with change, which is what calculus studies. He calls it fluxions because everything is in flux. As Heraclitus had said, nothing stands in the same place twice. Everything is moving. We're all in flow, we're all in flux. And as the Chinese sage Lao Tzu put it, the Tao is constantly moving. Heraclitus said the same. And Newton invented, with Leibniz together, a mathematics to explain that flow, that rate of change. But he said, he confessed in his book, you know, I don't know how it happens or why. All I've done is invent a mathematics to describe it, and I can explain, you know, what's going on here. And I can speculate there's this thing called gravity that's doing it. But how it works and where gravity comes from, I can't explain it. And really nobody has ever since been able to explain it. I'll come back to that point in a minute at the end. But the point I'm making here is that Imbolc is an important point on that yearly annual cycle of the 8 sacred festivals of the Druid year, which are mapped in most pagan religions, the same in Wicca, the same in American Indian traditions, in the medicine wheel of Wyoming. You know, they honour these different times of year. and and in the Asatru faith of the Norse runic peoples, including the Anglo-Saxons, Norwegians, etc. So, yeah, it's an important time. Imbolc means in the belly, because the idea is that the Divine Mother is now pregnant in the belly with the fruits that are going to come forth in a few weeks' time when the lambs are born. When I lived in Wales, in a beautiful cottage by the River Banwy, which is where Taliesin was whisked away to the woods to work with Ceridwen and to make the potion and so on. That was my Taliesin time. And in the garden at this time, snowdrops would come up. It was a beautiful time of year. And there might be snow still on the hills, but it was just beginning to, have that in the belly experience when the Earth Mother is pregnant. And for that reason, it's also sacred to St Bridget, who is the Irish patroness of the Druids. As a Druid, she is my line manager. I love Bridget. She represents the goddess in Christian form. She was Christianized as a real person. There was a St Bridget. She was a friend of St Patrick. He may have baptized her. But she was from a Druid descent, and she retained her love and faith in the ancient wisdom, but accepted the Christian wisdom. You see, the Irish and the Welsh and the Scots, the Celtic peoples and the Bretons and the people of Gaul, we accepted Christianity because it was a continuation of the wisdom that the Druids had already worked out. The Druids were seers of the truth, seers of Dharma. They were people sworn to non-violence. They were men and women. They were healers. Read Peter Beresford Ellis's book on Druids. They were the mathematicians, the scientists, the astronomers, and the counsellors. We could say the psychiatrists. They were the doctors who treated the sick. In some of the earliest, social medicine hospitals were free. You could go and clock into the Druids' infirmary, like in the wonderful Merlin series that we all loved on television. That's not too far remote from what it was like. They were into alchemy. The Ferret of North Wales was studying alchemy because they were trying to work out the pills and potions to cure people and to transform the lead of ignorance into the gold of wisdom. Thomas Vaughan, who coined the phrase anthroposophy, was from that lineage as well, from the Welsh Marches. I've written an encyclopedia about the Welsh Marches, as well as the Encyclopedia of Druid Studies, which, if you're not familiar with Druidry, you need to get. It's 3 volumes, 1,000 pages, and a lifetime of work, inspired by meetings with real Druids and encounters. When I was a boy, I didn't think there were any Druids. I thought they were just in books, like Merlin and stuff, fantasy figures. But the gods directed me, and I finally did meet, I realised this is a still living tradition. And when I went to Ireland and met Irish Druids in Scotland and Wales. So I've tried to do honour to this tradition in my encyclopedia. So we love Bridget. She's the Catholic, Christian, Protestant, Universal, Orthodox, Mystical, Gnostic Christian saint who brings us all home to smithcraft, bardistry, and we're all trying to make gold here. That's wisdom. That's enlightenment. The point of Druidry is not, it's not a sort of nostalgia for something past. It's a hope for something still to come. It's an eschatologically pointing, forward-looking faith that we will get through whatever dark times are upon us. I mean, think of the poor Irish. They had to cope with invasions, the Vikings coming and destroying all their libraries. I mean, there's nothing worse to a Druid Christian than to see his library torched by a bunch of marauding, extras from some Hollywood Viking film coming in and raping the nuns and slaughtering everyone. And although I have dear friends who follow the Viking path and assure me this didn't happen, actually it did. We know that in numerous instances. And a lot of the monasteries and libraries of Ireland were burned by them because they were ignorant. That's where violence and war comes from. Then the Irish had to suffer the ignominy of Norman Anglo-Saxon invasions. The Anglo-Saxons never bothered to conquer Ireland. They knew they couldn't. It was fine. That's their thing. This is ours. And in fact, the Anglo-Saxons were Christianized largely by Irish wandering saints and sages, and the Anglo-Saxons would go off to Ireland for a study holiday and spend a couple of years in a library studying amazing, amazing stuff. And we honoured the great Irish saints and learned from them. And I'm talking about the people that evangelised Mercia and Northumberland and Iona and St Columba. That tradition of Irish Christianity actually made British Christianity possible, or English Christianity. But later on, you see, once the wisdom traditions are ignored by the political military establishment, elite, so-called elites, actually they're demonic, they then lose all ethics, and so they went off and invaded Ireland. And and that was under Henry VI, who was a bit of a crazy king, I have to say. He needed a bit more ethics in his tuition. I'm not sure who taught Henry. He must have had private tutors. There wasn't an Eton in those days. That was founded by his descendant, Henry VI. But whoever taught him didn't teach him the fundamentals, which is why, of course, he had Thomas à Becket killed. He was trying to remind him of his intellectual duties as a king. It's interesting that Oxford was partly came into being at the time of Henry II because there were wars with France. Henry was always going to war. The English scholars who used to go to Paris, which was a flourishing university, they couldn't go anymore, and the sea routes were blocked. Does that sound familiar? So they went to Oxford instead, and Henry often had his court near there, in Abingdon, I think. And so Oxford began, becoming the in place to go if you were clever and wanted to be a trained lawyer or something. I think that Oxford has earlier roots. I think I like the tradition that Grimbald founded it at the time of King Alfred. I'm an Oxford teacher myself. I lectured at the university there, and my daughter did her master's degree at Oxford. If I was still in England, I would probably still be teaching there. So, sadly, I'm here in France, which I don't mind. I mean, I love France. But, yeah, Bridget, very, very important saint, and let's give her honour. And let's pray that Imbolc becomes a glimpse of spiritual light, as well as the physical light returning. And to our, dear friends in the southern hemisphere, well, I'm sorry, we're getting our sun back. So we hope you've had a good summer. And can't you see how life is so amazing? It's balanced with this whole complex mathematics is poised so beautifully. Newton said, look, I don't know who's created all this, but it's got to be some kind of divine intelligence. Leibniz said the same. Anyone who studies the mathematics of all this, there has to be something, some intelligence behind all this, which is why I set up my Centre for the Study of Divine Intelligence when I lived in the Castle of the Muses in Scotland. It's now been relocated here to France, but that question of what is that divine intelligence is something of great interest. It was interesting to hear David Lorimer talk about this in his interview with Rick Archer on the Buddha at the Gas Pump, which is a great series. I love what Rick Archer does. And yeah, the Galileo Commission that David Lorimer's Scientific and Medical Network has set up is trying to understand what is this divine intelligence. It's created, it infuses matter, but it's not itself material. Newton said it suffuses and diffuses throughout all matter, like a final and subtle spirit. He uses language from the books of Solomon. Solomon was his favourite sage from history, and he's certainly one of mine too. And in that image that Solomon has, I think it later becomes what Christians call the Holy Spirit, the Shekinah or Shakti that suffuses all of matter, my body, yours, the universe, the South Downs, my cat, we're all made of this Shakti energy. Well, what is it? How can we measure it? That's what the Galileo Commission is beginning to ask, and bless them, all power to their work. Meanwhile, let's move on, and we come back to the question of politics. I studied political science at university in London, did my PhD partly on that field, and we can't get peace on the planet just through metaphysics. Metaphysics is incredibly important. It's my home. I'm a philosopher. But we have to also bring that metaphysical wisdom down to the level of like the everyday jostling of power politics and, you know, BBC News and you know, New York Times and all the rest of it. And if we don't, then people that haven't got a grounding in proper metaphysics scientifically take over, and we get the kind of people that invaded the Capitol. And, you know, they're all deeply into metaphysics. It's just, it's ill-educated. I'm sorry. It's any metaphysics that leads you to the direction of violence, thinking that you're going to, you know, do a Hitler or do a Mussolini, do an attack on on other people through violence, is a false metaphysics. And I'm pleased to see that some of the people that follow the QAnon stuff are now realising that. They've woken up, they're being deprogrammed, they're growing out of it. For the whole of the Trump presidency, we've been bombarded with these false narratives, which war, violence, hatred, racism are all being normalised. It's been the same with Brexit, and the same crew, the same Cambridge Analytica, the same merchants of disinformation have been behind both Brexit and the Trump presidency. And I want to talk about, you know, well, what can we do about that? And we're seeing this now over the Scottish issue, Scottish independence looming, because the absolute consequence of Brexit is Scottish independence. I don't see a way out of it. Although, you know, it's interesting that our former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, has proposed the only way he can think out of it. And it's interesting he's come up with the same formula that I've come up with. I mean, I had a lot of time for Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister. I trained as a teacher when he was Prime Minister. And he, you know, he tried to do his best for Britain as a Scotsman. I lament the death of John Smith, who was a really intellectual version of Gordon Brown and was actually Gordon Brown's mentor. Gordon Brown is clever, but he didn't have the absolute clarity and gravitas of John Smith, who was the Labour leader before Tony Blair took power. And he's buried on Iona, where Columba was. I've been to the grave of John Smith. And when he was leader of Labour, I was organising meetings in Parliament on ethics and policy. We never met personally, but you know, you could tell that he was a very good man. And he was educated actually at Dunoon Grammar School, which is near where I used to live in the Castle of the Muses, at Loch Goyle. And so I think this question of Scottish independence is hugely important. The dissolution of the Conservative Party is not winnable. I mean, they created this mess with their Brexit referendum under David Cameron, which was not needed. It was only organised to sort of silence his extreme right critics in the Tory party. And he was overconfident. He thought he would easily win this and put them to bed. I think he underestimated the tenacity and sheer ignorance of the right wing of the Tory party. I think we all have. There is an underbelly in the Tory party, an extreme right wing thing, which has been going since the 30s and before that. It's a sort of British imperialism. It's Rees-Mogg is one of its, you know, high priests. But there've always been that type in the Tory party who think that England, specifically England, have a sort of divine right to rule the world. They were the triumphalists behind the British Empire. They believed that our army had the right to go and pillage and ransack and colonise Africa and wherever, Asia, America, you know. It was a fake narrative from beginning to end. I mean, John Dee, who coined the phrase the British Empire, didn't mean that's a carte blanche to go and colonise the world. No, he meant that Britain is a spiritual power, an empire of the mind, to use Churchill's phrase, which has the right to stand there with other powers and try and work out together a mathematics of enlightenment and love and liberty. I mean, John Dee was a very skillful, clever, mathematical and religious and metaphysical genius who played an interesting role. He was always trying to reconcile Protestant and Catholic. He was faithful to Elizabeth, but also faithful to Mary. And he went to see the Holy Roman Emperor. He was happy in Europe, which he loved. He travelled widely. He was offered a professorship here in France. My kids used to, when I was teaching, say, "You must be an intelligence agent. Who do you work for?" And I used to joke and say, but I don't think it's a total joke, "Yes, I'm an intelligence agent for the kingdom of God," which hasn't quite, manifested yet. In other words, I won't work for any particular nation state. They're all nearly supposed to be embodying the wisdom of the kingdom of God. I mean, Dee loved Trithemius's work, which said that each nation has an angel that guides its destiny. America, France, Britain, Scotland, England, we have different angels. And the duty of the sage is to try and tune in to that guiding angel and see where it's going. I think Dee would be 100% supportive of the European project, whereby the guiding angels of Europe's countries, Denmark, Sweden, France, Lithuania, Spain, Italy, Austria, which used to be all at war. The 30 Years' War was a horrible mess caused by these nations going to war. World War I was a repeat, horrible. Germany, ransacking and being, the whole thing was a meltdown. And then World War II was like the third act of this complete tragedy. To understand European history, you have to start with the 30 Years' War. You have to really realise the horrors of it. When Catholic and Protestant Europe had a nervous breakdown and went to war with each other, madly. And out of that came, ultimately, World War I, and ultimately World War II. Now finally, at the end of those three horrific acts, we've decided to actually, that's enough, enough, enough. We want a sealed peace treaty that will make it inviolable. We will never do that again. And that's the European Union, and it deserves all our support and prayers. Instead, the extreme right of the Tory party, which I was talking about, the sort of secret fascist, pro-Hitler, Goebbels wing of the Tory party, supported by the Daily Mail, which supported Hitler during the 30s, they've all, got their greatcoats off and dusted them down and come out as extreme right loonies. Now, it's shocking to have watched this from the perspective of Scotland, because when that Brexit referendum happened, I was in Scotland. And I mused very deeply about this, because I felt, no, this is totally wrong for, us to leave the European Union. It's bad faith. It's what Sartre calls bad faith. We've been a member for 50 years. We've done our bit. We're thriving as a country, the UK, because of our membership. I know that in Scotland, a lot of the hotels and so on were managed by people on summer jobs from Lithuania or wherever, and amazingly wonderful people they were, and that principle of freedom of movement, freedom of work, really works well in Europe. I've had workaways here from all over Europe, and they come for a bit, they go, and that's lovely. I've travelled in every single European country, I think, apart from Portugal, which I still have to go to, which is very sad, but I will do. And so why would we want to backtrack? Well, the only reason is because this extreme right, fascist, racist bunch happened to be extremely wealthy. They were backed up by the Daily Telegraph owners.